Hi, it's Laura at Aquamarine18. Thanks for stopping by my channel today. I am here with a VR that I have been planning to film since I saw the original video, and just, between not having time and my little bullet point list of answers growing and growing and growing, I haven't filmed it until now. But better late than never, right? So this is a VR to Juli at Peekaboorose, who made a video on deck delights and deterrents. This is basically exactly what it sounds like. Features in decks that delight us, that might draw us to a deck, versus features that might deter us from a deck that we don't care for. Not necessarily total deal breakers, but things that aren't really our preference, right? And I love tags like this because I just really like hearing what other people are into in a non-judgmental way, and finding that I have certain things in common with people that maybe I thought were really kind of idiosyncratic quirks on my part, but are actually, shared with others. I quite enjoy this experience. So, I don't think there's actually a tag to go with this. I think it's just a video that folks have been making VRs too. But I wanted to make a deck delights and deterrents video. And so I've got a kind of list of delights and deterrents, and I've got a stack of decks here to hold up as examples. Inevitably, I have more examples of my delights than I do my deterrents, because the deterrents don't show up in my collection very much. But here goes. And I'll just say, a couple of caveats in terms of how I've approached this question, or this prompt, I guess. I'm only focusing on tarot. My delights and deterrents would be quite a bit different if I was talking about Oracle. Maybe that's another video, I don't know, but this is just strictly tarot. All my examples are tarot. Everything I say delights and deters me is solely focused on tarot. The other kind of caveat I'm just going to give is that I'm focusing completely on kind of art style and kind of the system, mechanics of a deck. I'm not going to, in this video, get into things like cardstock, what kind of boxes I like, what kind of guidebooks I look for. I feel like in different videos past, I've kind of talked about that in different ways. The cardstock snob tag wasn't that long ago, so for the sake of not being repetitive, I'm only going to talk about kind of artwork and style in this deck, in this video, in this deck, in these decks, in this video. There we go. So, delights. The first delight that I have is decks with very strong elemental suits. I really like when a deck's wands suit, or whatever the equivalent name is, batons or whatever, feels really fiery. The cups or chalices feel really watery. The coins or pentacles feel really earthy, and the swords feel really airy. Elemental associations are a big part of my religious practice and my, the way that I think about the world, and also how I read. So I really like when those associations really come through, in the artwork or the design of a deck. I really like that. So the example I chose, be jealous, is my prototype of the Ocean Dry Tarot. This is the back by Colin Campbell, which I love. Keep an eye out for this deck coming soon. But this deck has a color system built into it in terms of the suits. So there is no color in the deck that only appears in one suit. Each suit shares a color with some other suits, but the kind of combination of colors that make up each suit is unique. And I feel like as a result of that system, there's a kind of feel to each suit that feels elemental to me in terms of my color association. So the cups, you get a lot of blues and greens. These are all the colors in the cups. Blues, greens, and an orange. And so these feel really watery to me. Somewhat similarly, I should have gotten this more organized in advance. The coins feel quite earthy to me. Actually, I think they're discs. I think they're discs in this deck. With a lot of greens in the coins suit, make them feel earthy compared to the others. Like this ace, based on the colors, feels very earthy to me. The camera's not going to do justice to these amazing colors. The wands feel quite fiery with an emphasis on oranges and reds, and also some purple in there. And then the swords, and like now I'm going to struggle to find one. The swords with the yellow, while they do have blues, more watery color, the swords feel really airy in comparison to the others. Here's a 4 of swords with that bright yellow, feels really airy to me. So getting that visual representation from the suits being distinctive in terms of their palette and standing out in that way, in a way that feels elemental to me, is a delight. I love decks with elemental suits. My second delight, that should be no surprise to anybody who watches my channel as of late, but is a somewhat newer delight for me, is decks that are landscape photography based. So I have a few decks that fall into that category. This is my soul deck, the Naturescapes Tarot, that is based in landscape photography. I find landscape decks to be so immersive and inviting and evocative, and a well curated landscape photography deck just captures so much of the meanings of cards for me, without necessarily having to have 10 swords and the 10 of swords, or without having to have a guy on a throne as the emperor, but capture the kind of energetic spirit of the, look at that sun card, right? Capture the energetic spirit of the card for me. So landscape photography decks, I have a few. The Naturescapes, the Tarot of Architectural Objects, also by Tina. I have what else? The Augenblick Tarot I would put in that group, though the Augenblick also has some interior scenes as well. And the Life Path cards by Kristen at Over the Moon Academy, which I also really love. Maybe sometime I'll do a video on landscape photography decks and why I love them. But that's a delight. Landscape photography, I'm going to have a look at that deck if it falls into that category. So that's a love. A third delight, I love some creative renamings of cards. I really like when, the court cards or the majors are renamed, and renamed with purpose. And the deck that stands out for me in that regard is the Numinous Tarot by Cedar McLeod. And not all of the cards in this deck are renamed, like the Chariot is the Chariot. The suits are renamed, but very recognizably so, like vials for cups, for example. But we have the courts are all renamed. So here we have the Creator. And a lot of the mages are renamed. So here, card 3, we have the Nurturer. And part of the renaming in this particular deck is to create a gender neutrality in the cards and in all of the titles. So the entire guidebook for this deck is completely gender neutral. Mystic is another title for the courts, and so some of them again are left the same, like the Fool. That's a favorite Fool of mine. But they're renamed in a way that makes the deck inclusive and makes really clear that any energy of any card could speak to any person, and I really, really love that. So when a deck takes a creative renaming of the majors, that is often a delight for me, and it's a delight particularly when it is done from a standpoint of inclusive intentions, and also from a standpoint of taking some of the gendered associations out of some of the cards, or taking some of the hierarchy out of the courts as well. I like that a lot. So renamings of cards is a delight. Another delight, that I don't, I can't really put a finger on why this is such a delight for me. But I really like black and white decks, or decks with very limited color palettes with only a few colors. And so one of my first decks actually was the Hurt in Hands Tarot. This is the back. This is one that I damaged by letting it get wet on a windowsill, so it's been chopped, but the cards are huge, so that's fine. And I love this style of art. It feels very like tattoo art to me in some ways. And I really like, and this is not to say that I don't love colorful decks, because obviously I do based on other decks I'm showing, but there's something about a black and white deck that really grabs my attention and that I really enjoy working with. I love the Six of Swords is one of my favorite minors, and this is one that I love. And so I have quite a few actually. Like, I don't know what the percentage would be, but in my collection I have the Gorgon's Tarot is black and white with a tiny bit of red. Thea's Tarot is a favorite, vintage black and white deck. So there are a few. Spirit Keeper's Tarot, black and white. I find black and white decks to be delightful. And colorful decks too. But black and white decks, delight. I really like, another delight in terms of style, is what I'm going to call like pip-ish minors, or like pips plus. Pips plus some extra. So not necessarily decks with minors that are just, straightforwardly, for example, Marseille style minors, which I do like. But I like when the minor arcana cards have something a little bit extra. So the deck that I chose as an example for this is the Anima Mundi Tarot. I know that another deck that people will know that would fall into this category for me is the Pagan Otherworlds. I would also say actually the Ocean Dry falls into this category a bit for me. But, the majors have a little bit of a nod to something like Pamela Coleman Smith's artwork here with the Three of Wands standing, with the vista in the background. But they're ultimately pips. They don't have people in them. They have something extra. In this case, they have some animals in them, and a bit of a scenic backdrop. They have nods to, again, the Five of Swords, the conflictual Five of Swords there, kind of an aftermath. They have nods to the Smith Waite, but they are pippish in that they don't have full scenes with people in them. So I don't know if there's a better name for that than Pips Plus. I'm sure there probably is. But that's a kind of style that I like. And I know that I feel like some folks don't like this because it's kind of a crossover thing, right? It's like if you're trying to learn, I could see this kind of deck being frustrating if you're trying to learn to read pip decks without just importing Smith Waite meanings into your reading of pip decks. I could see this being an annoyance, right? Because it evokes the Rider-Waite Smith in the context of a pip deck. But I really like this. Now that I feel comfortable with, pip decks or Marseille decks on the one hand and with Smith Waite on the other, I love these kind of slightly hybrid decks that have a little bit illustrated pips. That's a delight. And my final delight, and I don't actually have a lot of decks that fall into this category for me, is decks that feel really textural. So I really like artwork where the imagery feels like you can really feel the texture. And the one that stands out for me for that is the Tarot of the North Atlantic. This is one of my most impulsive tarot purchases ever. I saw Corvin of Tailraven Tarot had this deck, and I went online and I found it and I bought it before I finished their video. I paused it and I went and got the deck, and then I came back. And this deck is, it has embroidery and different needle crafts in it. You can see this is all fabric with stitches in there. And there are different buttons and different beads. Here you can see these fish are beads at the bottom. And so I just really love how tactile this deck feels, right? Not in the sense of like feels like the cards are textured, but the artwork feels really, really textured. It feels really multi-dimensional. It feels really 3D. you know, it jumps off the paper. I really like decks with a lot of texture in them. So those are my delights. Elemental suits, landscape photography, creative renamings of cards, black and white decks or limited color palette decks, pip-ish minors or like pips plus a little extra, and decks with a lot of feeling of texture in the artwork. So, I mean, I have lots of other delights too, probably, but those are the kind of things that came to mind as kind of general things that I like that aren't specific to one deck, but it's a thing that if I see it, I'm going to be attracted to it probably. Again, without getting into things like boxes or guidebooks, things like that. In terms of deck deterrents, it was actually a lot easier for me to think about deterrents, which I don't know like what that means about me, that it's way easier for me to think of things that I don't like, but things that I don't like or that deter me from buying a deck. The absolute first thing that came to mind was keywords. I do not like tarot decks with keywords. I have 2 decks in my collection that have keywords that are tarot decks. One is the Next World Tarot by Christy C. Rhodes. So these ones have have not necessarily the elemental associations, have some astrological association in the bottom as well as a keyword. So here we see redistribution for the 6 of Pentacles, strife. And I don't think, just to be clear, I don't think that these are like the Thoth keywords or like traditional keywords per se, but there's keywords that are there. And I also have the Urban Tarot is the other one, which has keywords. And honestly, if I trusted myself not to make a mess, I would chop them off. I don't trust myself not to make a mess, so I just try to not let my eye go there. I find keywords on tarot very, very distracting. You know, the keywords, of course, don't always mesh with how I think of a particular card. And even if they do mesh with how I think of a particular card, they don't necessarily go well in the context of a reading with other cards around it. So, you know, if a deck has keywords, I generally don't go for it. You know, I guess I can't say it's a total deal breaker because I do have 2 decks that have them, but there are decks out there that I would buy immediately if there was a keyword-free version. Let's just say that. But the keywords are acting as a deal breaker because they're too prominent, or like I can't get around them. This is one of those things where tarot and oracle are different for me, but keywords on a tarot deck is a big deterrent for me. I've mentioned before another deterrent, and I don't even have something to show here, really, is too many eyes. So if you have seen images of the wooden tarot, too many eyes, and in this case, too many eyes is functioning as a deal breaker for me. I do have the Earthbound Oracle by the same creator as the Wooden Tarot, and I love the Earthbound Oracle, but there are 1 or 2 cards in there that I actually like don't use, and one of them is because there's too many eyes. So, you know, having visually depicted like multiple eyes, more eyes than expected, is a no. The eye print on the back of the Many Queens Tarot does not bother me, right? Because that's not like on an animal or something like that. That's just a pattern of eyes. That's okay. But too many eyes is a big deterrent. Something Juli mentioned that was one of these, oh my goodness, like I thought I was the only person who really didn't like this or like thought this was a thing. But it turns out that we share this deterrent, is other things where you would expect to find a human head. So, like human bodies with something else, like a tree or like, I've seen like a fish tail or a flower, coming where the human head should be. That is a huge deterrent to me. And with some decks, it is, again, it's like the keywords. There are some decks that if that wasn't there, I would probably own. But things where human heads should go is a deterrent. And again, I don't have a deck to show you, I don't think, because nope. one thing that Juli liked, delight for Juli, but a total deterrent for me, is the big head, big eyes style, particularly the illustrated like girls and women with big heads, big eyes, kind of like Bratz doll type is like the best description I can come up with. I know that there's one artist who does this illustrations. Juli loves them. I don't. That's a deal breaker for me, actually. A whole deck, like, no. Big head, big eyes is a big deterrent. I can't even really like put my finger on why, but there's something, I don't know, there's something like infantilizing is like maybe the wrong word, but like something about it just doesn't work for me, and I don't know why, but big head, big eyes is a no. Another deterrent that I have that is not necessarily a deal breaker, but is a deterrent, is tarot decks that are made from pre-existing artwork or are very inspired by pre-existing artwork. So here I'm thinking of things like the Bauer tarot or the Rackham tarot, where art that it was made for something other than tarot is put into a tarot context. And in terms of kind of inspired by, I'm thinking of things like the Nightmare Before Christmas tarot. And I love the Nightmare Before Christmas. But decks like this are a deterrent for me when they're tarot decks, because I find that there's always an amount of kind of wedging in art that doesn't always fit with the cards. Like either the tarot system gets really stretched in order to kind of make the art work, or like the art gets really stretched in terms to try to make it look like it's the meaning. I find that inevitably with decks like that, there'll be some cards that really, really, really don't work for me. I would love these as oracle decks a lot of the time, but I find that the pre-existing art, it's very hard to do that very successfully to make the art fit the card meanings. And I don't think I actually own a deck that really, really falls into this category. So yeah, decks from pre-existing artwork is a deterrent. Again, not a deal breaker if it was the right one. And there are some like the Bauer Tarot, like the artwork is stunning. And I'm not saying that I will never own that deck because I've thought about it. But knowing that it's pre-existing artwork made from another context functions as a deterrent in that I assume that maybe it won't click with me, if that makes sense. Deterrent. Photos of people are a deterrent for me. I love the landscape photography decks, and decks like the Augenblick Tarot that have like some people, but mostly the people are kind of in the background, or not the focal point of the picture. Occasionally there, but for the most part not. That's okay. But decks that are made up of photos of people, for the most part, don't work for me. And I think it's because I have a hard time, like reading a image of a person in a kind of abstract way. Like to me, it's a picture of an actual person. Maybe it's a person that looks like somebody I know, and so I get hung up on that. But pictures of people is a deterrent for me. The one exception that I have that came to mind was the Our Tarot by Sarah Shipman, recently made in a mass market version. This is the indie version. And in this deck, the fact that it's photos of people, like the whole deck is photos of people, or almost the whole deck is photos of people, I actually like. But in this deck, they're photos of specific people whose names are on the cards, right? So there isn't that level of kind of abstraction from who that individual being depicted is, right? So we have like Katherine Johnson, and Katherine Johnson is the Eight of Pentacles, is something that has been thought out in terms of who Katherine Johnson is, that having her on that card would make sense, right? So having a photo of Katherine Johnson is like a specific choice in the context of this deck, as opposed to just having, for example, a picture of like a random woman who is supposed to just kind of be read as kind of a neutral person. I struggle with that. I don't know if I'm saying that in a very clear way, but I love this as a deck. I love the photos of the women in this deck. Again, though, they're specific women chosen for specific cards, and in this case, photos of real women is why I bought the deck, because I saw that there was an image of Octavia Butler and just bought it because Octavia Butler is one of my favorite authors of all time. So yeah, photos of people generally don't work, but in this context, because they're specific people, it does. Similarly, this deck is also an exception to another deterrent rule that I have. It's not a rule, I guess. Another deterrent for me that just tends to be something that I don't gravitate towards is collage decks. Particularly decks that are entirely collage. So I'm not so much thinking of decks like Dust to Onyx, which I love, which has some collage components in it, but also has other mediums as well. But purely collage decks don't tend to be my style. I don't know why. It's not that I can't appreciate the work or that they can't be pretty to me or anything like that, but collage decks are not my style. except for this one, apparently. So collage decks are a deterrent. And the last deterrent, which I don't remember why I even put this on my list, because I don't have a deck to show you, but it's something that I've seen on a few decks that I don't like, and that is writing on the backs of cards. I like a card back to be very, very neutral, and I'm not going to talk too much about that because I do have still plans to VR to Casper Boy Diviner about favorite card backs. I like a back of a card usually that is neutral and that kind of suits the theme or the aesthetic of the deck. But I have seen some card backs that kind of have, initials or words on them, and that's kind of a deterrent to me. I feel like I would be very distracted if when I'm shuffling and looking down, I see something that I can read, like a word, right? So that's a deterrent. So my deterrents that I listed were keywords, too many eyes, other things where human heads would be expected, big head, big eyes, decks from pre-existing art, photos of people, collage decks, and text on the backs of cards. Those are my deterrents. So that's my delights and deterrents. Thank you so much for watching. I've had fun going through these decks with you, and I will see you all again soon. Have a good one. Bye.